Ecuadorian President Guillermo Lasso declares a state of emergency nationwide after the 6.5 magnitude earthquake that shook the country this Saturday. In France, demonstrators take to the streets to protest against President Emmanuel Macron's pension reform. The Russian President Vladimir Putin receives his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping in his first foreign trip after his historic re-election for a third term. From the headquarters of TeleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South. I'm your anchor, Gladys Quesada. And now we begin with the news. On Sunday, the President of Ecuador, Guillermo Lasso, declared a state of emergency for the whole country. Addressing the nation, Lasso assured that the measure will allow to face in a more expeditious way the effects of the 6.5 magnitude earthquake that shook the country on Saturday and the rains that have left damages. It was also known that in the case of the province of Azuay, one of the most affected, a state of emergency has been declared. The president assured that during the weekend he visited the areas most affected by the quake, and the verification of the situation led him to take the measure that he explained in his terms. In Peru, the municipality of Punta Hermosa has issued a communique ordering the emergency evacuation of the inhabitants of the district due to a landslide warning in the area. Authorities have issued the evacuation orders for parts in Punta Hermosa, Lima, and due to the threat of landslide. Reports indicate that a rupture of a reservoir in Santo Domingo de los Olleros may cause large landslides in the municipality, particularly in North Beach and Central Beach. Officials are recommending residents to stay alert and move to higher grounds. Authorities could expand evacuation order in the coming hours. Disruptions in electricity and telecommunication services are possible where significant flooding or landslides impact utility networks. Floodwaters and debris flows could render some bridges, rail networks, or roadways impassable, impacting overland travel around affected areas. And the Brazilian President, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, announced that federal government will support with its own resources the fight for the state of Rio Grande do Norte against organized crime. A few hours after the criminal groups known as Crime Syndicate or Union, responsible for the attacks in that state, have burned down a train station in the outskirts of Natal, the regional capital, on Saturday night, the Brazilian president published a message on his social networks expressing his support for restoring peace and protecting democracy in Rio Grande do Norte. Lula da Silva affirmed that he had a telephone conversation with the governor of the state, Fátima Becerra, to study measures to strengthen security in the region. He also confirmed the deployment of some 500 agents of the National Public Security Force who will travel on Monday to Rio Grande do Norte, together with the Minister of Justice, Flavio Dino, who will be in charge of coordinating the support to be offered by the agents. And during an interview with the Lebanese media outlet Al Mayadeen, the Cuban President Miguel Díaz-Canel talked about the history of the Cuban Revolution and its current challenges in a world still suffering from the structural inequality which has been heightened after the pandemic.
The revolution has constantly been revolutionizing itself. The revolution has constantly been in transformation, in changes, adapting itself to each one of the complex historical moments that it has had to live through, and this has been done at the present time. Therefore, the revolution has not stopped being a revolution of changes, a revolution of transformations, and for this reason it has the majority support of the Cuban people. We should ask ourselves how the revolution, which since it was born besieged, attacked, blockaded by the main imperialist power, by the most powerful power in the world, only 90 miles away from that power, how it has been able to resist all that onslaught of blockade, sanctions, and aggressions. and at the present time of tightened blockade and a broad media campaign that seeks to discredit and undermine the authority and the example of the revolution. When one thinks about these things and the way and the attitude in which the empire has acted against that revolution, which has only wanted the well-being of the Cuban people, there is only one answer. It has done it out of hatred. And it has done it because it is worried by the example of that revolution.
The Cuban president also mentioned how neoliberalism failed in the face of the pandemic and how it cannot solve the world's issues in favor of the majority.
I believe that the world is experiencing a very difficult situation. There's a lot of hopelessness in the world. There's a lot of uncertainty in the world. We have just gone through a pandemic that upset all the paradigms of neoliberalism. So many years of neoliberalism, so much propaganda supporting neoliberalism. And when a complex moment arrives, the world sees that neoliberalism is not able to solve with equity and inclusion for all the issue of the pandemic. The health systems of the most developed capitalist countries collapsed. These health systems were overwhelmed. How can we explain that the neoliberal world does not provide alternatives for the majority?
The Cuban president also stated that revolution will always be the aspiration for young people and that revolution should be seen with all its contradictions.
In the middle of the pandemic, the rich have become richer and the poor have become poorer. Therefore, this inequality that has been formed, that is formed within the capitalist society itself, where the 1% takes advantage and takes 90% of all the wealth that is being created, this inequality is leading to rebellion, and it's leading to the rebellion of the youngest people of the new generation. That is why I'm of the opinion that revolution is an alternative regardless of the way the revolution is carried out. The revolution will always be the aspiration for young people. However, it is always necessary to take into account the historical references and to critically analyze what has happened in the revolutionary processes. We will not only see the revolution from an idealistic position, but we must see them with all their contradictions, with the moments they have lived through, with the moments they had to be overcome, and even to see those revolutions that could not last and could not succeed because of the mistakes that were made.
Let's take a short break, but first, remember you can follow us on our TikTok account at TeleSUR English, in which you will be able to see news in different formats, news updates and more. Other stories coming up, stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. In France, protests continue against Emmanuel Macron's pension reform. Citizens came out to the streets once again to reaffirm their rejection of the government's plan to change the retirement age from 62 to 64 years old, approved on Thursday without the vote of the parliament under the legal protection of a constitutional power which makes it possible to avoid the legislature. Sunday's demonstrations took place one day before the vote in the parliament on motions of disapproval presented by the opposition deputies forces against the government, which, if approved, will invalidate the presidential decree. Demonstrators described the reform as unfair and its approval as an arbitrary measure on behalf of the government. Therefore, they have claimed that blockade actions will be sustained and will gradually increase. And the voters in Montenegro have cast ballots in a presidential election marked by political turmoil and uncertainty. More than 1,200 polling stations opened their doors at 7 a.m. local time on Sunday and closed at 8 p.m. in an election that might decide whether the small NATO member state will unblock its bid to join the European Union or instead seek to improve ties with Serbia and Russia. If no candidate secures more than 50% of votes, a second round of voting between the top two is scheduled for April the 2nd. Dujanovic, a pro-Western president, has held top political posts in the country for 33 years and is seeking another 5-year term. Though the presidency is largely ceremonial in Montenegro, the ballot is seen as a key indicator of popular sentiment ahead of parliamentary elections set for June 11th. And Serbia and its breakaway province, Kosovo, are on their way to normalize relations after tensions between both rose in November 2022. Serbian and Kosovo authorities met in the city of Okrida in northern Macedonia with the mediation of the European Union. Serbia's president, Aleksandar Vučić, said his government and Kosovo agreed on several crucial points in what he considers as a progress in the constructive process for the normalization of ties. The Serbian leader, however, pointed out that while his country is ready to work on the implementation of many points of the plan endorsed by the European bloc, formal recognition and membership of Kosovo in the United Nations is out of the question. Kosovo unilaterally declared its independence in 2008 with the support of the United States and many of its allies. The breakaway region is now recognized by several countries, including Russia, China, and Serbia itself. Kazakhstan held early elections on Sunday, allowing independent candidates to be elected to parliament in a sign of democratic openness. Kazakhs went to the polls on Sunday to elect the lower house of parliament, the Majlis, in a snap election as part of the institutional overhaul promoted by the country's president Kassym-Jomart Tokayev. Polling stations for Kazakhstan parliamentary elections close at 8 p.m. local time. After a calm voting day, the Central Asian country's Central Election Commission, the ZEC, reported. The turnout was just over 5% or lower than in the previous parliamentary elections in January 2021, when it was 58.2%. In addition to the Majlis elections, which are valid regardless of voter turnout, special local elections were also held. And the Russian President Vladimir Putin paid a visit to Mariupol, inspecting the city infrastructure and talking to local residents. They discussed the construction of new residential microdistricts, social and educational facilities, housing and communal services infrastructure, and medical institutions. Deputy Prime Minister Kunushulin told Putin that Mariupol residents were actively returning to the city following the restoration works, adding that public transport is up and running in Mariupol. Kunushulin showed Putin the building of the city Philharmonic Hall. The Deputy Prime Minister also said reconstruction of the city center, where many historical buildings are located, is planned to be completed by the end of 2023. In this context, President Vladimir Putin also met with senior military commanders at a command center in the city of Rostov-Don. According to the Kremlin press service, the meeting took place as part of an unannounced visit by the Russian president to the command and control center in southern Russia, responsible for military operations in Ukraine. During his visit, Putin received an assessment of military reports from the troops stationed at the control center. The high-level meeting follows Putin's surprise visit to Crimea and the city of Mariupol in the Donetsk region. TeleSUR English continues to grow. You can now tune in from 33 different African countries through StarSat. Dial 461 and enjoy our Latin American alternative broadcast. One final short break and we'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back. The Chinese President Xi Jinping arrived at the Vnukovo airport in Moscow, the Russian capital. This is the first foreign trip of the Chinese head of state after his historic re-election for a third term. The meeting of transcendental importance will review aspects related to strategic interaction and the development of global partnership relations between Moscow and Beijing. The peace plan for the conflict in Ukraine is also at the top of the agenda of the heads of state. The Chinese Foreign Ministry's spokesperson, Wang Wenbin, has said that Xi's visit was a trip for friendship, cooperation, and peace. The Iranian Foreign Minister Hossein Amir-Abdollahian stressed that peace in the Middle East is a priority among the agreements reached for restoring relations with Saudi Arabia. During a press conference on Sunday, the diplomat affirmed that Iran and Saudi Arabia have agreed to normalize relations broken off 7 years ago. Iranian Foreign Minister also said that the agreements achieved were reached in the meeting between Ali Shahmani, the Secretary of the Supreme National Security Council of Iran, and his Saudi counterpart, Muzammil bin Mohammed Al Ayban, who have been meeting in Beijing since March the 6th. The Iranian Foreign Minister also said that he will meet with the Saudi Foreign Minister, Prince Faisal bin Farhan, in the near future, and that he is pushing for the reopening of the embassies in both countries.
در آستانه نوروز با کسب اجازه است جناب
and also the suggestion of 3 venues for the meeting. We will agree on a time and place of the meeting as soon as possible after coordination between us.
On Sunday, Iraqi Prime Minister Mohammed Shia al-Sudani met with the head of Iran's Supreme National Security Council, Ali Shahmani, in Baghdad. A statement by al-Sudani's office said they discussed relations between the two countries, as well as security and political situation in the region. Al-Sudani and Shahmani also discussed Iran's and Saudi Arabia's recent re-establishment of diplomatic relations. Shahmani signed a memorandum of understanding on security with Iraq's National Security Advisor, Qasim al-Araji. It included coordination in protecting the common borders between the two countries and the consolidation of joint cooperation in several security fields, the statement said. And the former Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan criticized Islamabad police on Sunday after being accused of terrorism and other offenses. 17 of his aides and scores of supporters were also charged after ousted Premier's followers clashed with security forces in the capital on Saturday. The clash took place outside a court where the former Prime Minister was to appear in a graft case. Riot police wielded batons and fired tear gas while Khan's supporters threw fire bombs and hurled rocks at the officers. More than 50 officers were injured and several police cars and motorcycles were torched. Police said 59 of Khan's supporters were arrested during the violence. Khan faces charges of terrorism, obstructing police officers in carrying out their tasks, attacks on police, wounded officers, and threatening their lives.
They were isolating Imran Khan. Their plan was very clear: isolate him and bring him inside the judicial complex. Their plan was to murder me. I'm making that clear. And I will also make clear what happened in Islamabad. They wanted to arrest me and take me to Balochistan from there. These were the conspiracies and plans. What I saw on people's faces at that time was anger and emotions. They were not afraid of anything. Fear is over. If I hadn't gotten out of the car there quickly, I'm telling you today, we would have had a bloodshed. The police were provoking supporters and they must react. And the situation would have gotten out of everyone's hands.
Kuwait's Constitutional Court has ruled that last September's parliamentary election, in which the opposition made gains, was void and that the previous assembly must be reinstated. The body issued its decision due to discrepancies exhibited in the decree of dissolution of the National Assembly in 2020. Furthermore, the court ordered the restoration of the previous National Assembly, dissolved last June 15th by decree of the Emir, Nawaf al-Ahmed al-Shabah, amid a political paralysis caused by divergences and reciprocal accusations between deputies and members of the government. This decision comes after opposition members won the early elections in 2022 with 28 of the 50 seats in the recent appointment of the former Prime Minister Ahmed Nawaf al-Ahmad al-Sabah as member of the new government. And we have come to the end of this news brief. But remember, you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also, if you feel so inclined, please join us on social media for all the latest news. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Telegram, and TikTok. For TeleSUR English, I'm your anchor, Gladys Quesada. Thank you for watching.